Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest edition of Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop. I'm Charlie Turner, and I'm joined by the NASCAR Fantasy Guru of all time, Dan Beaver. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great. High 80s down here. A little bit of rain, but it's comfortable. If it weren't for the mosquitoes, I'd be perfect.
Yeah, we had our rain event yesterday. It's actually kind of cooled off a little bit, quieted down, kind of sunny day, nice day here in the Midwest. And we're in the Midwest, and I'm only about 4 hour drive from where the Sprint Cup guys go this weekend, which is Kentucky Speedway, just south of the Ohio-Kentucky border. Let's talk about Kentucky. We're returning to the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks. We've been away for a while.
We have, and the best way to enjoy a cookie is if you haven't had one in a while. So get out a big glass of milk. We got one of 10 cookie cutter races coming up, and this is the one that's kind of probably the furthest separated from the other races. I haven't really sat down and mapped it out to see exactly where it fits, but slipped in between the road course at Sonoma and the wild card restrictor plate super speedway race next week at Daytona. It certainly feels like an island in the storm, a moment of clarity in the midst of madness.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're returning to NASCAR's roots when we go back to one of these tracks after we've been away for a while. Because I mean, there are more of these types tracks in the season and in the series, and this is where if you're going to be a championship contender, you have to be good on these tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I balk at calling it NASCAR's roots. For people who became fans probably in the late '90s, maybe 2000s, maybe that's it. Maybe that's their roots. But short track racing, dirt track racing, those are the roots.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm talking modern era, I guess. Let's say.
Yeah, and like I said, for those new fans, this certainly probably feels like the roots. This is what they've become accustomed to seeing, and I think, just to digress, I think it's one of the reasons that the short track races we have are so well received, that we've got a lot of fans that just don't remember that's what it used to be like all the time.
Yeah, it's a special deal now when you go to a half-mile track or even a mile track. There's only a couple of those on the circuit anymore, so it is kind of a special deal. But you and I have talked about this before. We like it wherever they're racing, and Kentucky's a great racetrack.
Yeah, and it deserved a date, and I'm glad that it got one. We're now getting enough. We're starting to get enough data off of it, as much as you can in a single race track, and you can supplement that with data from the other similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks. We've got Texas, Vegas, Kansas, Charlotte already in the books. So we've got 4 races that are on closely comparative courses. You also can toss in, I think, some of the records from Auto Club and Michigan. And so we've got a relatively recent race, Michigan a couple of weeks back, that allows the drivers to capitalize on the momentum that they built there. So anybody who ran strong at Michigan probably will kind of pick up what they left off. Michigan's not highly banked in the corners, neither is Kentucky. So you've got another comparative there.
And I would think another fast race. It was very fast at Michigan. We talked about Michigan Speedway. Raced there a couple weeks ago where they broke at least the realistic, unrestricted speed record for one lap in qualifying. Kevin Harvick was real fast at 2:04.55, I think, something like that. Kentucky won't be that fast, but relative to the size of the track, I think they'll be pretty quick down there.
Maybe. I think there's a lot of talk about how rough it is, and I think that'll play a factor. As the track gets rougher and rougher, it's a little harder to get that little bit of extra speed out of it. But it also puts the driving back in the driver's hands. So hopefully it's not getting so bad that they're thinking about paving it. I've heard a few rumors to that end in the past couple of months. But hopefully it'll take them at least another couple of years before they repave it and just make it another single groove track until that wears in.
I wonder if when they do repave down there, if Bruton Smith won't go with the multi-lane. I've drawn a blank on the term.
Progressive banking.
progressive banking. I had it before I started that thought. If they won't go that way with that track down there, because they have had success. I mean, almost at Bristol, it's almost a progressively banked track now.
Yeah, and they've had some success at Las Vegas. Some
Right.
pretty good races out there, and harsh weather conditions
Right.
that have managed to that it's held up against. So I think Homestead's another progressively banked track at a mile and a half. It's
Yep,
more of
it
a
is.
true oval, so not nearly as comparative. But that would put Vegas as the biggest. Uh, in my mind, it put Vegas as the biggest comparative to Kentucky. You could
Yeah.
almost look at those two tracks uh, separate from all of the others.
All right, so let's get into the specifics of what fantasy players should do this week at Kentucky Speedway.
I think you're looking at some of the cast, the same cast of characters that have been there been at the front of the pack for most of the season. This is not necessarily a good week to roll the dice on dark horses because it's a mile and a half track. It's the mile and a half tracks make up 25% of the schedule, and if you toss in the 2 mile tracks, Auto Club in Michigan, it's more like a third of the schedule. So this is where the money comes into play. This is where the super teams, the big organizations like Hendrick Motorsports, Penske, Stuart Haas, Richard Childress, that's where your favorites are going to come from. You get an occasional guy who can get up into the top 20 by skill and by using the resources they can, by testing a lot on the mile and a half tracks and ignoring the other tracks. So you get a couple of fresh faces at the front. But they're more likely to come from someone like a Paul Menard than it is to come from a David Reagan and Front Row Motorsports.
How about somebody like Trevor Bayne and Wood Brothers, because this is their focus type track. I'm not even sure they're going to be there this week, but this is the track that they supposedly pulled back to concentrate on. Would you look at Bayne and like in C in Yahoo for a race like this?
You might on another cookie cutter track. There are places like Texas where he runs well, but he's not here. He's not here this week.
Okay.
In fact, unless someone pulls out a backup car, we're looking at less than a full field for the first time since 2001, I believe.
Right.
There are only 42 cars entered this week, so that in itself is a storyline. Doesn't really impact the fantasy racers, except that I suspect somebody's going to come up with a car so that they know they can get last place money, and we'll get 43 cars in the lineup. So far as the favorites are concerned, though, you're looking at that combination of drivers who've done well on the cookie cutter track so far this year and have done well at Kentucky. Matt Kenseth is probably at the top of that list. He has only one top 5 on cookie cutter tracks, but he's got a perfect sweep of the top 10. Finished 10th at Vegas and Kansas, was 7th at Texas, and 3rd finally at Charlotte, where he needed a good run, got a good run, challenged for the victory, didn't get the victory. He won the last year's edition of the race at Kentucky, has a perfect top 10 streak there. So both his most recent cookie cutter race and his most recent Kentucky race, top 5s, one of them was a victory. You got to look at him as this as being another one of his best opportunities to get into victory lane before the season winds down. However, it's difficult to call him a favorite outright because he's been so erratic this year. So Jimmy Johnson, unfortunately for the people who think he's ruining the sport, he and Jeff Gordon are probably going to be your 2 favorites before the weekend starts. They both have done really well on the cookie cutters this year. Johnson isn't perfect. Gordon has been, I believe. They both have been perfect at Kentucky. They both have momentum on their side from all the victories they've had in the last 6 weeks. Almost a 6th consecutive victory last week at Sonoma. This could be the place where either of those drivers gets their first Kentucky win and knocks off one more of those tracks as they march on their way to having won on every active track in the series.
Yeah, they don't have many left between them.
I believe this could be the last one for Gordon, and it's one of 3 or 4 for Johnson.
I think Johnson has 3 left. When he
Yeah,
checked off at where did he recently win that he hadn't won before?
Charlotte,
Charlotte.
which
That's
was
right.
surprising that he hadn't won there.
Right.
That was a little bit of a shocker in its own right.
Right.
And I think this is the last one that last track that Gordon hasn't won on. So if that's the case, he's really going to be gunning for it. He won't be nearly as polite as he was to Carl Edwards at the end of Sonoma. He'll go for it if he's in a position to go for it. Problem there continues to be his inability to restart. So you can never take that out of the equation until he proves his critics wrong, and it's going to take more than a race or two to do that. Kevin Harvick, if has back-to-back second-place finishes in the last 2 cookie cutter races at Kansas and at Charlotte, he's chomping at the bits for a victory as well. He could get it if they don't make a mistake in the pits. There are all those little extra storylines that are floating around out there that just make it difficult to handicap the race. And all of those drivers are going to be expensive in salary cap games. So you're looking at putting your money on 1 or 2 of them and then spreading the wealth around drivers that are somewhere in the mid-pack. But luckily, you've got a pretty good group of drivers. I mentioned Paul Menard earlier. He's not extremely expensive in most races or in most games, but he's had 3 top 10 finishes and a 17th in 4 cookie cutter races. He's starting to be one of those drivers that you can look at as predictable, where he hasn't been pretty much throughout his career. Carl Edwards, coming off of last week's victory at Sonoma, hasn't been great overall, but now he's got a little bit of momentum on his side. And where he has shown in the first half of the season has been on these mile-and-a-half tracks. A 5th at Vegas, a 4th at Charlotte, a 6th at Kansas, and a 14th at Texas. So it's Ford has been getting their butts handed to them a little bit this year, but with Penske running strong, with Edwards running strong, they could have 3 drivers challenging for the victory, 3 drivers challenging for a top 5 at least towards the end of the race, and it makes Edwards at least a good salary cap play. Logano's probably not. Well, Logano may have gotten expensive in most games by now if the managers of the games have been paying attention and ramping him up. Keselowski has been uneven enough that he hasn't had all that many back-to-back top 10s. He's probably not terribly expensive. So you've got some good values there.
Any love for Greg Biffle this week?
No, not particularly. In the 4 races on the mile-and-a-half tracks, he has 1 top 15, which was the 6th at Texas. He came close to Kansas with 16th, but Kansas was one of those tracks that he should have challenged for a top 5. Since he didn't, it suggests to me that there are other problems at play there at Roush Fenway. Could be the distraction of the contract negotiation, could be something else, and he's not. I suspect he's going to finish somewhere around 16th to 20th again.
Yeah, I had an informal conversation with Greg on the Sunday early before the race started at Michigan, and indicated that their work was cut out for them. And I don't think he was just talking about that race. I think he thought the team was still behind.
Yeah, we talked about this on the on Pit Row hangout a few weeks back. I think they're in a rebuilding year, or it's going to be a rebuilding couple of years, with Bain coming up next year. Stenhouse, the only driver that we know is going to be back. Probably Biffle or Edwards will be back, and they'll be the senior statesmen there. But they're going to be lacking a lot of experience in a short period shortly, and that's just going to compound their problems. It's going to compound the problem for whichever veteran sticks around, if Biffle or Edwards sticks around. So I think we're looking at sporadic strong runs from them throughout this year, and then we have to wait and see what 2015 is going to bring. But that said, I think Edwards is probably a good pick this week out of that camp. Doesn't mean that he's a place and hold driver. So if you're looking at putting someone on your roster that you can leave for a couple of weeks, Edwards probably isn't your guy because he's got a lot of flat tracks coming up, and those aren't part of his strong suit.
Kyle Busch has been pretty good at Kentucky over the years there since Cup Series has gone there. Any love for the Toyota cars this weekend? Anybody at Toyota that jumps out and gets your attention?
I want to say good things about Kyle Busch each week, but he makes it so hard.
He does,
Uh,
doesn't he? I mean, it's for a guy who's as dominant and talented in the two lower series, trucks and nationwide. I know the talent level is different and the quality of the car is, it's not as deep in those fields. But he just totally dominates both of those series whenever he shows up, and he's so erratic in the cups.
yeah, and on the mile and a half track specifically, he's either going to finish in the top five or he's going to hit the wall.
Yeah.
And it seems like a flip of a coin as to which one it's going to be. I think I remember being shocked that he won the first race at Kentucky because I predicted he was coming off a really bad run of cookie cutter finishes at the time. He'd crashed just a couple of weeks earlier at Charlotte, was awarded the pole because qualifying was rained out that week. Awarded the pole by NASCAR's rulebook, and then pretty much dominated that first race and won it handily because he didn't hit the wall. But you just don't know what he's going to do. He can't get away with the same. He can't get away with the same stuff. He can't drive in nearly as hard in the Cup car as he can in trucks or in Nationwide. The competition's not going to let him get away with it, where they do in the smaller in the support series. So I think that's part of it. When he ran Casey Kane up into the wall at Pocono, I think that underscores his tendency. He hoped or expected Kane to lift. That's just not going to happen at the senior division. They're not going to be cowed by something like that, even if it means both drivers are going to crash. And as is often the case, both drivers crash. So if he doesn't crash, he'll finish in the top five. It's hard to know if he's going to crash.
Right. Well, if not Kyle Busch, we looking at Matt Kenseth this week to maybe they break through top five?
I think Kenseth should be on the cusp of fifth. I don't think he's going to challenge for the win. I think he's got too much baggage this week to do that. But by the numbers, he certainly should finish in the top five. He could get shuffled out in the closing laps and finish just outside that mark. He's another one of those drivers that was so good last year. He probably started off expensive in salary cap games, and he's had enough strong runs that he hasn't just plunged down the order, the list. So he's not going to be one of the cheapest drivers in the field. But if you've got bad feelings for the Hendrick heroes, if you've got bad feelings for Happy Harvick, then Kenseth might be the guy that you make your stud this week. And he'll be a cheap stud.
Denny Hamlin, anything there?
Denny Hamlin, I think I've got the same impression about him as I do Biffle. The talent is there, the potential is there, but he hasn't shown it yet on the mile and a half tracks. And in fact, after finishing 12th at Vegas, he's gotten progressively worse each week. He was 13th at Texas, he was 18th at Kansas, he was 22nd at Charlotte. That downward spiral could continue. So, no. If he practices well, could change my opinion before the weekend starts, and that's one reason to follow me at Fantasy Race on Twitter and to engage me, ask me questions on Friday night, Saturday, since it's a Saturday night race, because sometimes those opinions change. But right now, based on his season to date on this track type, it'd be hard to make him a favorite.
All right. Well, we've talked about mostly about salary cap game. Maybe we should kind of switch and get over and talk specifically about the Yahoo game and what you do there. I know you pretty much addressed the A drivers early in the show here today, but maybe we should talk specifically about picks for those three categories.
Yeah, and I think this is strategy takes a front seat this week, as it's going to next week as well at Daytona. This week it's different. You don't want to risk your allocations on dark horses. Play it safe. It's going to be Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, Kevin Harvick in Group A, Nobody's going to be surprised. Maybe a Dale Earnhardt Jr. if you want to go outside the box some. Maybe Casey Kane if you really want to go outside the box, so that you've still got that Hendrick power under the hood, and you don't have the drivers that are going to be the most popular in that group. But for the most part, at each level, you're going to try to play it safe. So you jump down to B, and your safest picks are Logano, Keselowski, and Edwards. Those are your drivers that are going to be the top handicapped. And then you might salt in one driver who could be considered a dark horse. And from that, I would pick between Jamie McMurray, coming off a strong run last week. Chip Ganassi has been doing particularly well on the unrestricted intermediate speedways. Paul Menard and Ryan Newman has a good record on the mile-and-a-half tracks this year. Not very flashy, but worst finish of 16th. And
this results. Talking Newman?
Yeah, this is Newman. Worst results of 16th at Texas, and a fairly narrow band between 7th and 16th. So he's predictable. He's probably going to be in the low teens, maybe in the high single digits if everything goes right. But you may be running short on a player, may be running short on Logano or Keselowski, and need to roll the dice on that dark horse. And if that's the case, consistency matters. Newman has it. You would almost take a 12th, 13th place finish if it was guaranteed, than risk a Kyle Busch who could finish 5th or 40th. So this is the week to look for those consistent picks. Tony Stewart, I've got in the top half of Group B. They've got the power plant. He's got the skill. He's been good on the mile-and-a-half tracks in the past, but they're going to have to get rid of those mistakes that we've talked about so much this year. So this is summer. It's the time that Tony Stewart's supposed to heat up. At one point, he's going to start to rattle off strong finishes. Could be here, could be Daytona next week. Might not be till we get to Indianapolis, but it's time to put him on the radar screen and watch him closely in practice. You jump down to C, and there are only 2, maybe 3 picks. This is one of those times that you're going to have to take either Austin Dillon or Kyle Larson. At some point, you've got half of the allocations are going to go to those 2 drivers, 9 each, 18 races. So you got to plan them out in advance, and you got to kind of stick to that plan. This is one of those weeks, since it's not kind of dark horses, that those drivers need to be on your roster. And if you can't put them there because of allocation management, because you want to or need to save some allocations for later in the year, Danica Patrick might be your next pick. She had that top 10 at Kansas, her career best finish. That momentum carried her into Charlotte, so that she had a strong start to the beginning of that race. I believe she got caught up in a crash and didn't get to finish the way she ran. Then she ran reasonably strong, actually pretty strong, at Michigan a couple of weeks ago. So she's coming into her own, but she's also erratic. So if you think you might want to extend your allocations on Dillon and Larson, what you may want to do is put one of those drivers that you know you can start on your provisional roster, put Danica Patrick on your roster, and that gives you the chance to evaluate her in practice and qualification.
So if she looks good in practice but qualifies poorly, would you be more likely to take her there and pick up the place differential points, betting on that? Yeah.
You could be in like the NASCAR Fantasy Live game. She tends to be a pretty good pick there because she tends to make up ground during the race. She gets a little bit better as she goes, except when she's occasionally a good qualifier too, and then she drops back.
Right.
In the Yahoo game, I think if she qualifies well, when she ran well at Kansas and at Michigan, I believe she had good qualification efforts. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. And that gave her the confidence to race and a different group of drivers to race with. I think she needs to race with Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Kevin Harvick. She needs to race with drivers who are not making mistakes. Because if she gets back there in the pack, she makes the same mistakes they do. She races at the front. She doesn't race as perfectly as the veterans do, but she certainly races better. And she needs to be in the front of the pack to be a good value overall. Your point's well taken, though, about the place differential. If she any of the marquee teams that qualify outside the top 30 tend to be a good pick in the NASCAR Fantasy Live game or the Sports Trade X game, where they're giving points for place differential, because they're going to move forward. But they really have to qualify at least outside the top 30 for that to come into effect.
Okay, so practice is important this week. Does it start today? I know the trucks race tonight.
No, it's a 2-day show. So everything's tomorrow, both practices and qualification, and then the race is on Saturday.
Okay. All right. Well, it should be interesting. What other points should we bring up? I know that this is we're actually past the halfway point, right? Or are we right at it?
I think we're right at it. I think this is race 18.
So you talk all the time about allocation, driver allocation, that kind of thing. Is there anything that you've seen so far in the first 18 races that made you totally change your mind about your strategic plans for the season? Anybody that's jumped up and other than maybe Kyle Larson, I guess, that's jumped up and said, "Yeah, I got to rethink how many times I'm going to use this guy or gal."
Well, I think you knew that you're going to start Larson 9 times. You knew you were going to start Dillon 9 times, and what may have changed there is which 9 times it was going to be. And for the record, this is race 17, so we're just still one race shy of the halfway point. Daytona will be 18, the 18th race. Jimmy Johnson struggling at the beginning of the season, I think, changed people's plans. So that's good news. Hopefully, they jumped off his bandwagon early, and now they can climb back on it, ride it for a while, let him rest for a while, and then expect that he's going to have a good chase. Although that's not a given. Since he struggled at the beginning, he could struggle at the end. I'm not predicting that, but Denny Hamlin, I think, is another driver that you changed how you thought about him. You go into the season with Hamlin thinking, okay, I'm going to start him 9 times. It's probably going to be on a flat track. It's definitely going to be at Martinsville. It's definitely going to be at Richmond. So there are half of his allocations. And Pocono, there are 6 of the 9. You don't have to worry about him a lot. But since he's been uneven, he's actually been much better on the plate tracks this year, with the second place finish at Daytona and the win at Talladega, that you might as well roll the dice on him there and kind of forget about him on flat tracks for a little bit. Drivers that have come on strong, I think Allgaier is going to have a good second half of the season, so he's going to become fantasy relevant in Yahoo's Group C. He could become fantasy relevant in salary cap games if he starts to improve consistently. That's the best way to ride a driver, to ride the bandwagon of a driver in the salary cap games, is when each week is just a little bit better than the week before it, because it takes a long time for the salary caps to catch up to them then, unless you've got a really good manager. And most of the managers of the salary cap games, they're either doing it by formula. It takes a while for the formula to catch up, or nobody wants to look silly if they make Allgaier the 5th most expensive driver. You look dumb. So you kind of ease them up, and having set salary caps for a number of different games, I've got a sense for that. Martin Truex Jr. could be a driver who comes on strong. He had a 15th place finish last week. He had back-to-back top 10s at Dover and Pocono. Looks like they may have their communication issues worked out. That team had some good runs last year with Kurt Busch behind the wheel. Martin Truex Jr. had some good runs at Michael Waltrip Racing, and those two things come together. So someone's going to emerge in the second half that's a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, real quickly, you mentioned Kurt Busch there in that segment. He's one of those that's like radioactive too, isn't he?
Yes. I've said this for years, and it's probably not fair. I don't know the guy personally, but he does not seem to do a good job of driving within himself. He cannot control his emotions. And when he does, when he finds that that perfect balance of just a little pissed off, but not so much that he can't steer straight. He's great, but that's such a fine line. He starts to see red, and he's like his brother. He tends to slap the wall, or he tends to make a mistake in the pits, or he speeds because he's annoyed with the pit crew. And those drivers are just caustic to have on your roster.
I wonder how many fantasy players Kurt Busch costs championships, because he's so tempting. I mean, it's like a drug, you know.
Yeah.
You see his results at a place like Bristol or something like, you know, and you watch him qualify and you watch him racing, and he's, you know, you can see the top 10 talent, but then you're right, he just like short circuits.
Yeah, and you get that sinking feeling as the race goes on, and he's there in the top 5, and he's just doing really good, and you think, I left him on my bench, or I didn't start him, and I knew I should have started him, and then whack.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel better.
Yeah, that's right. It's a relief.
Yeah. He's kind of easy to hate from that standpoint, or easy to root against from that standpoint, because you probably gave him some thought for your roster if you didn't start him. I think Kevin Harvick's kind of developing that same tendency this year.
He is. He really is, and I'm a little surprised at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe Richard Childress was more of a calming influence on Harvick than even he realized.
And in this situation, he doesn't have the boss on the box talking him down. The boss is in another car getting pissed off at drivers himself.
Right. So, he's liable to be the one making him pissed off.
Really. So that whole organization, they've got all the pieces in place, but they're risky. They're risky propositions each week. I don't think that they're going to get to be a predictable good value until Tony Stewart climbs out of the seat and becomes that Richard Childress type owner that can actually call the race from outside of it. Unless they can bring, I don't know who they could bring in. The crew chief talent doesn't tend to be that kind of person. You've got Roger Penske who can talk down drivers. You've got Richard Childress who can kind of browbeat drivers or talk to them forcefully and get them in place. You got Joe Gibbs who can do that. You always think of an owner doing that rather than a crew chief or a manager, a car manager. So until Stewart gets out of the car, I don't think that we're going to see that team really come into their own.
And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Any last thoughts about Kentucky before we close it off for this week?
Enjoy it, because Daytona's right around the corner.
It's looking like local weather looks like it's going to be pretty much perfect Friday and Saturday, so should not be any delays for weather, hopefully, knock on wood and all that thing. They get the traffic problem figured out there so fans can get in the stands. It'll be fun. We'll be watching Saturday night for sure.
Are there still people trying to get in for the first year?
I was there for that. And it was I've never seen anything like it. I've been to a lot of big sports events where traffic was an issue, and that was just nuts.
That was Carmageddon.
Yeah, it was really bad, but it was an experience. I'm kind of glad I was there. I saw the worst of it, you know. Okay, this has been Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop again this week. This week we talked about Kentucky Speedway. Next week we'll be back to talk about the restrictor plate race at Daytona for what Dan and I like to call the Firecracker 400.
Yep. Go with the old names.
All right, Dan. Thanks again. We'll talk soon. Everybody, make sure you follow Dan on Twitter at Fantasy Race. You can follow me on Twitter as well at On Pit Row, and look for the debut of the On Pit Row magazine. Should be any day now. We're waiting for the final Apple approval of the initials, so keep your fingers crossed on that one.
Should be fun, and there's some good fantasy information in there as well.
Terrific stuff. Yep, that's great. Okay, thanks, folks. We'll talk to you next week.